There are new bombshell claims today from royal insiders who say King Charles's cancer is incurable and he will likely die with the disease.
There are shocking new claims emerging today from high-level royal insiders who confirm that King Charles's ongoing struggle with his health has reached a definitive and heartbreaking turning point. When Prince William entered the briefing room, he carried no prepared speech, while Catherine stood silently by his side with her hands locked tightly together. Then came the very sentence Britain had feared for months, but never expected to hear so directly. The king had entered the final stage of his life, and his remaining public and constitutional duties were drawing to an official close. There was no grand ceremonial language used to soften the blow, nor any promises of an unexpected recovery, but rather a somber, heartbreaking truth delivered by a devoted son preparing to lose his father while carrying the enormous weight of the monarchy on his shoulders. William had read that opening sentence repeatedly before stepping in front of the nation, yet the words remained almost impossibly heavy to speak aloud. Catherine watched his expression tighten every time his father's name was mentioned, fully aware that this was no ordinary royal announcement. A formal palace briefing of this magnitude carries far more than mere policy updates. It carries the immense emotional weight of family preparing for a quiet farewell while the institution of crown braces for an inevitable transition. King Charles had deteriorated beyond the point where his medical team believed he could safely continue performing public engagements. He was placed under continuous medical supervision at Windsor, while senior officials initiated the legal mechanisms required for a constitutional transition of royal authority. This meant that Prince William was no longer waiting for a distant future. The reality of his future reign had arrived while his sovereign father was still alive. Catherine stood steadfast beside her husband as he confirmed the full truth. The king had permanently withdrawn from public life to spend his remaining time surrounded by his immediate family. William's voice trembled slightly as he spoke, exposing the grief-stricken son beneath his official royal title. Charles had personally reviewed and approved the statement earlier that morning, deliberately removing a line that suggested he might return to public service, knowing it would no longer be honest. He requested that there be no grand spectacle or attempt to mask the severity of his condition. When William finished speaking, he placed his hands on the lectern and lowered his head into a heavy silence. Catherine reached out to touch his arm, anchoring him through an agonizing pause before they quietly departed the room together. While the public processed the official news, a far more intense, private emotional conflict had already begun behind closed doors. William was grappling with the impending loss of a father whose approval he had sought his entire life. While Catherine watched her husband inherit a burden he never wished to claim under such tragic circumstances. Meanwhile, Queen Camilla sat just a few rooms away, confronting the heartbreaking reality that the life and influence she had spent decades building alongside Charles was nearing its final chapter. The relationship between Charles and William had always been complex, built on a delicate balance of deep affection, institutional pressure, and generational distance. For years, conversations between them had left important feelings unspoken, but now time was running out. Catherine had long acted as an emotional bridge between father and son, understanding the delicate succession balance that needed to be struck without making William feel as though he were prematurely planning his father's passing. The crisis had not begun with the public statement, but weeks earlier during a private investiture rehearsal inside Windsor Castle. Charles had risen to address a small group when he suddenly froze mid-sentence, his hands gripping the back of a chair as his strength completely gave out. William rushed forward to support him while Catherine ordered the room cleared and summoned the medical team. Although Charles fought stubbornly to maintain his working routine, the medical evaluation that followed confirmed that his condition had advanced sharply. When doctors advised an immediate cessation of public duties, Charles reacted with fierce resistance, fearing that stepping down meant surrendering his purpose. A tense confrontation erupted between father and son behind closed doors, where William implored his father to prioritize his health over public appearances, refusing to let the crown demand a final sacrifice from a man who had already given everything. Realizing the physical toll it was taking, Charles ultimately yielded, setting into motion the transition that brought the royal family to this pivotal, emotional crossroads. The emotional surrender from King Charles inside Windsor Castle marked the formal end of an era, but instantly unleashed a subtle yet fierce internal struggle for authority and legacy within the royal household. every document awaiting a signature, and every phone call made across palace corridors carried immediate constitutional consequences. Although William was still officially the Prince of Wales, palace officials and government advisors began directing crucial files to his desk, decisions that had exclusively belonged to the monarch for decades. Queen Camilla witnessed this swift shift with deeply mixed emotions, while Catherine recognized the immense mental toll it was taking on her husband. Meanwhile, Charles, resting in his private quarters just rooms away, could hear the invisible machinery of succession accelerating without his active involvement. William entered the castle study to find senior courtiers waiting beside a sealed official folder containing the protocols for the sovereign's final days. This temporary operational framework was specifically created to keep state machinery, international diplomacy, and royal household operations moving seamlessly when the reigning monarch becomes physically unable to manage them personally. Every schedule William was forced to review and every formal statement he had to clear felt like a morbid rehearsal for his father's death. Catherine watched him struggle under this immense psychological pressure, gently reminding him that accepting constitutional responsibility did not mean he was wishing for the crown. She understood that without clear leadership at the top, uncertainty and conflicting rumors would paralyze the palace at the worst possible time. However, Queen Camilla challenged this new arrangement almost immediately upon realizing its extent. She argued forcefully that no courtier or advisor understood Charles's personal wishes as intimately as she did, and that no son, regardless of his title, could replace decades of shared private trust. Camilla's fear extended far beyond losing official influence. She harbored a deep, unspoken anxiety that once William assumed complete control of the royal household, the doors of the institution she had fought so hard to belong to would quietly begin closing around her. Charles had anticipated this painful friction before his sudden physical collapse at Windsor. In a formal royal directive signed in the presence of his private secretary, the king had named Prince William as the sole final authority over royal operations should he become incapable of communicating his wishes. This document left no legal room for debate or division, while simultaneously entrusting Catherine with the vital responsibility of preserving family harmony and protecting young Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis from the emotional fallout of the crisis. When William finished reading the document, he placed his pen down and firmly informed the senior advisors that he would assume these responsibilities on one strict condition. His father's personal dignity must remain absolute. There would be no stage photo opportunities, no forced public appearances, and no final days dictated by rigid protocol. Charles received news of his son's conditions through a recorded message from his private secretary, closing his eyes with visible relief before asking whether Camilla had been present when the directive was executed. That absence marked the beginning of a cold new reality within the palace structure. Camilla soon discovered that all official communications, medical updates, and household management decisions were now passing exclusively through William's office. The transfer of power had been designed to preserve the stability of the monarchy, yet within the family, it felt like an abrupt isolation. Camilla did not hear this news from her husband, but directly from William during a private meeting in a room where her counsel had once been routinely sought. This time, the papers were already signed and the directives were already active. Her husband remained king in name, but she no longer stood at the helm of his official world. As William calmly explained the strict boundaries of her revised role, disbelief gave way to a far more vulnerable sense of uncertainty. She questioned whether this transition was truly about constitutional necessity, or if William intended to distance her the moment Charles was no longer there to protect her position. William chose his words with utmost precision, but no amount of diplomatic language could soften the reality. From that moment forward, all decisions regarding succession, timing, household security, and public statements would rest with him. While Camilla retained unlimited personal access to Charles as his devoted wife, she was completely detached from the levers of royal power. William assured her that this was not an act of vengeance or personal punishment, but an essential step to shield the monarchy from internal chaos. Yet, decades of complex family history made even formal explanations feel deeply personal. Camilla removed her glasses, her voice breaking slightly as she asked if Charles had agreed to every detail. William responded with a firm, simple confirmation. He then revealed a protective clause written into the directive. Charles had explicitly guaranteed her private residences, security detail, and public standing regardless of how the succession unfolded. Charles had quietly secured her future while accepting the end of his own, leaving Camilla alone with the realization that the man she loved had already made his peace with what was to come. Before the royal family could fracture under the immense weight of the transition, King Charles made one final emotional request. The institutional machinery of the crown had placed severe strain on their personal relationships, but Charles now asked to see Prince William and Catherine alone, without courtiers, medical advisors, official note-takers, or formal protocols standing between them. When William and Catherine stepped into the quiet room, Charles was no longer speaking as a reigning monarch surrounded by state duty. He was simply a father waiting for his son. For the first time since the crisis began, nobody mentioned official schedules, constitutional authority, or succession timelines. The king looked at William and asked a deeply poignant question that had remained buried beneath years of royal expectation: whether his son was ready to forgive him for the distance that duty had so often created between them. Charles had weakened noticeably, yet his mind remained entirely clear, knowing that this might be his last opportunity to resolve the unspoken tensions that pride and formal royal protocol had left unfinished over the years. Catherine sat gently beside the king, taking his hand to offer comfort, while William remained standing for a long moment, caught between his identity as the heir to the throne and his feelings as a grieving son. That distinction carried deep emotional weight, because an heir prepares to carry forward the institutional legacy of the crown, while a son simply longs for more precious time with his father. William remained silent at first, prompting Charles to break the quiet by acknowledging how cold and rigid his devotion to duty had sometimes made him seem. He confessed that it often pushed William under belief that intense pressure would prepare him for the heavy demands of kingship, but realized too late that it had often made his son feel judged rather than supported. Charles referenced the most difficult years of public scrutiny and family turmoil, where personal wounds had to be masked behind ceremonial perfection. William finally spoke, admitting that he had spent years preparing for the throne while secretly carrying a sense of guilt, as if every lesson learned and every responsibility accepted was an implicit countdown to his father's passing. Charles reached out, and William stepped forward to take his father's hand in a powerful gesture of reconciliation. The silence between them was no longer filled with strain, but with profound honesty and mutual understanding. Charles then shared his final piece of wisdom with the future king, stressing that the monarchy would only endure if William chose to lead with greater authenticity rather than rigid distance. He explained that while the crown demands unwavering dedication to duty, it should never require the sacrifice of family affection or emotional truth. Turning to Catherine, the king made a personal request. He asked to protect William from becoming emotionally isolated beneath the immense weight of crown, describing her as the anchor capable of preserving the man behind the royal title. Moved by this quiet moment of unity, William made a firm decision. His father's remaining days would not be dictated by public appearances or rigid official agendas, ensuring that family togetherness would take total precedence over institutional demands. Within hours of Prince William and Catherine's initial public statement, the story spread rapidly beyond the gates of Windsor. Broadcast networks adjusted their programming. Church bells tolled across London, and crowds began gathering outside Buckingham Palace and Windsor Castle. People brought flowers, handwritten letters, and quiet messages of gratitude for the king's decades of service. Inside the castle, William watched the television coverage briefly before asking for the screens to be turned off, unable to listen to commentators speculating about his father's remaining time. Catherine remained steadfastly by his side as they prepared the family for what lay ahead. In a final, deeply symbolic moment inside the quiet apartment, Charles removed his personal signet ring and placed it into William's palm. When William tried to gently refuse, Charles closed his son's fingers around the gold band, asking him to carry the solemn duty of the crown while leaving behind the mistakes of the past. In that quiet room, away from the glare of public life, a father was forgiven, a prince was fully prepared to lead, and a family stood united as the chapter quietly closed on a historic reign.